really doesn't matter whether you're buying your first classic or your 50th. It should be an enjoyable and an exhilarating experience. But if you don't follow some basic rules, you risk getting it really badly wrong. So this video is here to help you on your buying adventure. It's just as applicable for the aficionado as it is for the classic car buying virgin. What the guide will do, it will help you narrow down your choice, avoid some of the common pitfalls, and make sure you get every step of your buying journey right. Hello. My name's Danny Hopkins and I'm editor of Practical Classics magazine. When it comes to buying a classic car, yes, you've got to choose with your heart as well as your head. Do you want a sports car? Do you want something more practical? Of course you're going to choose with your heart, but when it comes to love, you'll stick with that partner through thick and thin. And we all know that with classic cars there might be an awful lot of thin. But to start with, make sure your classic fits in your world, and that's why I've got this in my hands. I've got to measure the garage, because that might have to go in there. It fits! Right, let's get started. If you know the car that you want, you know the marque that you want, I think the best place to start is by joining the club. When you join the club, you get access to all the best knowledge and all the best expertise. You also get the club mag, which will have its classified section in. You'll be able to go online, they'll have a Facebook page probably and a website. Have a look in there for cars to buy. What you'll find here is possibly you'll have cars for sale which are slightly above the market value, but you'll be able to rest assured that you'll probably be buying a car that's been really, really well loved. Now, if you're feeling a bit braver and you're confident in what you're buying and how to, and you're also a bit more flexible with time and what you're looking for, then go for the wider media. Have a look in the classic press, have a look in Classic Car Weekly, Practical Classics particularly good. You'll find bargains in there. There's all sorts of things for sale, and there are also stuff that you won't find on the internet as well. Of course, the internet, big beast these days. Get your searches saved on eBay and on the other classic car websites as well. They'll contact you when a car that you want comes up. Make sure that you look carefully through the internet. Have a look at Facebook sites and forums. Really, really good place to find some excellent bargains. Search deep, spend time doing it. You have to invest a lot of time in it. But have a look at Facebook groups, and particularly for cars that need to be sold quickly. And this is one of the crucial things about looking online. You've got to be really, really patient, but you've also got to be ready and willing to act quickly, particularly for cars that need to be sold quickly. Finally, why not try going to a live auction? Now, classic car auctions are great fun. They're brilliant. Go for the theatre, I would. But if you're going to go to a classic car auction to buy something, it's really important to observe a few really simple rules. Firstly, if there's a car that you like, make sure that you inspect it really carefully before you bid. Secondly, always go with a ceiling price, the most that you're willing to spend, and stick to it. Thirdly, take a really grumpy friend with you, somebody who's sane, knows their stuff and knows you as well, so they can keep you in your box if it all gets out of hand. Here's a message for anyone reading a classic car advertisement. Beware of the following 7 deadly phrases.
Good condition for its year.
It's 50 years old, what do you expect?
It needs some TLC.
Tender loving care with an acid dip, an angle grinder, a welder, some paint, some tyres, an engine rebuild and a transmission rebuild.
90% complete.
I didn't label all the parts 10 years ago when I ripped it apart, but the consolation is you might find a lawnmower in there somewhere.
No time wasters.
I have delusions of grandeur, and I think that the car is worth more than everybody who's come to look at it so far. I also have a barky dog and a baseball bat.
Totally original.
The stuff that you'd hoped was new, like tyres and oil and spark plugs, that's all original. And the stuff that you'd hoped was original is currently hanging off the car. So yeah, it's 100% original.
Just one owner from new.
Who is 90 years old and has spent the last 25 years driving his car 1 mile a week to the shops, so the engine is silted up and there's no synchro. Right, so if you plump for an ad that you really like the look of, important to give them a ring. Don't go by email. Give them a ring. It's a really good way of finding out whether you're talking the same kind of language. Now, when you do phone them up, make sure you ask about the car. Don't ask about the specific vehicle. Don't ask about the Triumph 1300. Ask about the car. Because if they answer you which one, then you know that you're talking to somebody who's got a lot of cars for sale, probably a dealer. If they don't, then you know that you're talking to a private seller and they're talking about the specific car you're looking for. Now, it's important to talk on the phone, build up a rapport, because that way you can find out if you're speaking the same kind of language. You can find out, for instance, if your definition of immaculate is the same as their definition of immaculate. Don't email, always call. And finally, it's really important, if you say you're going to go and see someone at a certain time, make sure you do. So you've identified the car that you want, you've given them a call, you like the sound of it, you've decided to go and see the car. There are no hard and fast rules, but I would say don't buy the first car that you see. The law of sod dictates that the next car you see will be the one you should have bought. However, if the first car you see is superb, then of course, buy it, but make it a judgment call. Be wary of your own enthusiasm. Always look at the car in the cold light of day. Get it parked up somewhere nice and flat so you can stand back and have a look at how the stance is, how it sits on its wheels. Does it lean over to one side? All sorts of stuff you can notice by stepping back. Then crouch down next to the car and have a look along the flanks of the car. Have a look along the swage lines. Check that everything's consistent, that nothing's wavy. That could be a really good indicator, really good negotiating point. Next, check the panels. Are they all the same colour? That might indicate that it's had a respray. You've got to ask yourself why. After that, go around the car looking at all the panel gaps. Are they consistent? Are they up to factory spec? They don't necessarily need to be perfect, but you've got to check it. Next, all the doors. Check all the doors, hang on their hinges properly, shut nicely. They don't sag as soon as you pull them off the latch. It's really important to do that. Finally, the big one. You've got to check whether the car is rotten as a pear, and that's what I'm about to do. When you're checking for rot, always use a magnet. Now, why would you do that? Obvious, isn't it? Car's made of steel, magnets magnetized to steel, so if there's anything going on behind the paintwork like filler or just plastic of any sort, the magnet won't stick. That means there's some negotiating to be done. If you're going to use a magnet on a car like this, always slip it in a sock so you don't scratch the paintwork. And of course, if the car's aluminium or made of GRP, then this doesn't apply. However, let's have a look at this rear valance, see if it's made of steel. Run it along. Yep, that's all steel. I once bought a Vauxhall Victor from the side of the road. Its sills were almost entirely made of papier-mâché and chicken wire, but it was really well done, so they look really straight. If I hadn't used a magnet, I'd have bought a car with no structural integrity. Bad news. The other thing to say at this point is if you've got a buyer's guide, bring it with you. Because if you're going to be looking into the panels and where the car traditionally rots, the buyer's guide's going to tell you in a really easy way, so always bring it with you. Right, if you're going to do this properly, then you're going to need some kit. And what we've got here is the kind of basic kit that we recommend you use. Overalls, because you're going to get dirty, or I'm just wearing clothes I don't really care about. A tarpaulin upon which to grovel, really important, particularly if it's raining. We recommend don't go and look at a car if it's raining if you can possibly avoid it, because not only does the paintwork look better than it actually is, going under a car, really not pleasant. Magnet in a sock again. Really powerful torch, really important to have a real good look into the deep dark crevices. A camera phone, okay? Because you can actually use this to get into those crevices and have a really good close look, take pictures. Axle stand to put a car on if the owner is in agreement. And a trolley jack so that you can jack the car up in the first place. Arrange to view the car at the vendor's house or premises, not at a lay-by or service station. You've got your rough clothes on, so bring something to lie on so that when you're digging for rot, you're not worrying about getting dirty. And dig for that rot, and the grot, and the bodgery. Jack the car up, get it on axle stands, grovel underneath, Jam yourself or your camera phone under the wings and footwells and use anything crunchy, flaky or bird pooey as a bargaining point. If you find a really nasty area that you don't want to dig into, don't until you've asked the seller if it's okay. Seek permission to reveal the filth, and if they say no, personally that's the point at which I'd walk away. If they say yes, then you've got that permission and you can go for it. With this in mind, it's important to arrange the view of the car again at the vendor's house or premises, because if stuff starts falling off, you don't have to drive it anywhere. Don't look at cars in lay-bys or service stations. It's a golden rule. Right, now my advice is always bring someone with you to give you a second opinion, preferably somebody who's prone not to such rash decisions as you are. Maybe somebody who's a bit of an expert as well. What do you think, Pete? That's what you need. When you've satisfied yourself that the car is completely sound and you've checked through the bodywork, have a conversation with the seller. Talk to them about the paperwork in particular and ask to see it. If there's no paperwork, ask them why. That's another conversation to have. If there is, check through it in real detail, interrogate it. Check the V5, check the MOTs, check the service history, check the bills and receipts, and make sure that all the numbers match the car that you're buying. Because I've seen cars for sale before with massive history files, and the history file itself has been for another car. If the seller starts trying to hurry you along a little bit, then just say to them that you need to take the time. They say things like, I've got a queue of other buyers. You've got to ask yourself why. Then ask if you can do an HPI check. I recommend doing this on most classic cars, particularly ones where you're spending a lot of money. At least do an MOT history check, because that can flag up all sorts of issues. All of these things really need doing. And with the MOTs, if a car has become MOT exempt from May 2018, you are well within your right to say to the seller, please may I take it for an MOT, or please would you take it for an MOT at a classic friendly MOT station, because it's safety crucial. And if they're going to check it, they need to check the brakes, suspension and steering. You're well within your rights to ask them to do that. Okay, next time we're going to be taking this car out on the road and having a look under the bonnet. Having checked your reasons for buying a classic car and done all the bodywork checks in previous videos, now it's time to have a look at the engine. So let's open the bonnet. There's a Triumph Straight 6 underneath here. The first check should be cold engine checks. Make sure the engine is cold. Make sure the seller hasn't been cranking it over for half an hour with a can of Easy Start. So yes, the engine is cold. Let's go right for the big one to start with. Look inside the oil filler cap. This one's got one straight on top of the engine here. If there's any mayonnaise in there, that could be a sign of head gasket failure. Now, mayonnaise is a kind of white, frothy substance, and you're looking for quite a lot of it. A little bit around the cap might just mean condensation on the inside of the rocker cover. But that is something to negotiate on, if it's there. Equally, go down to the radiator. Have a look inside the radiator cap. Some cars might have an expansion tank. Most older cars have got a radiator cap like this. You won't be checking for mayonnaise here. What you'll be checking is for oil in the water. So maybe tip your finger in there, have a little look. Oil in the water, again, might mean that the head gasket has been compromised. Do lots of general checks around the engine bay. Check strut turrets here. We've got these strut turrets here. Check them for corrosion. Check the inner wings. Check the inner wings where they meet the front panels, particularly. Not just for corrosion, but for evidence of repairs. That might mean the car's been in an accident. So really have a look at that carefully. Have a look at the leads. Make sure that they're in good condition, not brittle. Have a look for any signs of oil or incontinence of any sort. Check inside the clutch reservoir and the brake reservoir. Make sure that the fluid is really, really clean. Check the oil dipstick. Check the colour of the oil. Check that it's at the right level. Have a little smell as well, because you can often tell a lot from that. If it smells really burnt or unpleasant, that might mean the engine's overheated. In an automatic gearbox, do exactly the same thing. Pull the dipstick out and have a smell. If it smells burnt, there could be an issue there. Make sure it's the right colour too. You're looking for a nice red colour with ATF. All of those things, really important things to check. And you can have other indicators of the condition of the car. Check inside the dash pots to make sure that they've got the oil level correct as well. If you want to go even deeper with your engine checks and the seller's happy for you to do so, why not try a compression test? And that means you'll need to take the plugs out. Taking the plugs out itself is really useful, because you can look at the tip of the plug and It gives you an idea of how the engine's running. What you want is a nice biscuit colour, which says that it's not running too lean or too rich. There is another Skillshack video that tells you how to perform a compression test, so you can go and refer to that one. But a compression test will really give you a clear indication as to the condition of the engine, particularly the bores and the head gasket. If you've done that and you're happy with all the checks, then it's time to start the car and do some warm checks. Okay, start it up with the bonnet still open. A little bit of choke. Okay, started first time. Does it need churning? This one didn't. Are there any rattles on startup? This is all about using your ears. If there are rattles and they disappear straight away, that's potentially good news. If they carry on, that's a question to ask. Flip the throttle, does it return to idle okay? Don't rev its nuts off, you won't learn anything. Most important of all when you start it up like this, listen for deep knocking noises. And if they don't go away, that's a potential problem. Right, now let's go and have a look at the back. Okay, now it's time to use your eyes and your sense of smell. The engine running, if there's any blue smoke coming out, that means the oil's being burnt. Could be an issue with piston rings, maybe valve stem oil seals. If it's puffing black smoke, sooty smoke, and there's a very strong smell from the exhaust, that means it's running rich, and if that's been going on for a long time, that might have an effect on the engine. The best way to tell whether an engine's in good condition though is to get the car out on the road, and that's what we're going to do now. Okay, on the road, first thing you need to get is an impression of how it pulls. Does it pull consistently and smoothly? Has it got lots of urge? Does the engine feel healthy and perky, not holding back or waffling? Take it through all the gears, flick the top switch if it's on overdrive. We've got an overdrive car here, we're in an overdrive car. I've just flicked it into overdrive and out again. All the gears change correctly. When you're in top, just try slowing down a bit and then really putting your foot down to see if there's any clutch slip. Quite an important thing to do. Again, take it up to national speed limit if you can, because you'll want to find out whether the car's got any vibrations, whether it pulls to one side or not. It's really important to give it all the different road conditions that the car will find in daily use. Another very important thing to do is a brake test. But before you do that, make sure you find a very quiet, straight bit of road where you can see a long way in front of you and a long way behind, because you don't want to do a brake test when there's any other cars around or on a road that you don't know. What you're looking for on a brake test is really whether the car pulls to one side or not. That's the most important thing, and quite important to try a bit of road that doesn't have much camber on it, because the camber will affect how the car pulls up. You've got flat road surface, straight road, and then you can really test whether the brakes are good or not. So important to do this. If you're testing a car for its braking capability, you find something that's a problem, it could cost you an awful lot of money, and of course it's safety critical, which is so important. Okay, so we're now on a straight bit of road, and nothing behind me, nothing in front of me, no camber. We're going to hit the brakes. Hands off the wheel, doesn't pull to one side, so this car's absolutely fine. It pulled up really well, didn't have to use all of my braking capability there. Also, you're testing the servo as well. Pulled up really well, so I'm quite happy with that. And again, the other thing you'll be doing here, by using the brakes carefully, seeing whether the brakes bind on afterwards as well. Okay, in general, on your test drive, listen really carefully. You drive with your ears as well as your eyes. Listen really carefully for knocks and bangs and rattles. Work out whether there are any rattles in the car, what they might be. Listen for rattles outside the car. Take it over lots of different road surfaces. And make sure that every aspect of the vehicle is really tested at fast and slow speeds. So the other thing that's on the test drive as well, and this is really important, what looked good in the advert might be not quite what you want to drive, and that might not be to do with the condition of the vehicle. That might just be that you perhaps have chosen a car that you don't get on with on the road, and you've got to be honest about that. There is absolutely nothing wrong with taking a car out for a test drive and it being an okay car, but then when you get back saying, actually, I'm really sorry, it's not for me. You're not a time waster if you do that, you're just being realistic. Okay, another thing to check for when you're out on the road is the blue smoke on the overrun. I'll tell you exactly what that is. Firstly, you check for it like this. You get up to, say, 40 miles an hour in top. It's really useful to try and do this on a downhill stretch. And then for 5, 10, 15 seconds, just take your foot off the gas and slow down, slow down, slow down. And then reapply the gas and look in the rearview mirror. If you've got a puff of blue smoke at that point, that means potentially your valve stem oil seals are on the way out. That could be a negotiating point. I wouldn't call it a walk away. So check for that. Another thing to check as well is if you've got blue smoke all the time, that might be a more significant problem, possibly piston rings, maybe head gasket. Again, negotiating points, all of these things are. Really crucial, take your classic, your prospective classic, for a long test drive at all road speeds, okay? And this includes up to high speeds on motorways, dual carriageways if you can. Keep your eye on the temperature gauge. Temperature gauge is a great indicator of engine condition. If you're driving at high speed on a motorway, for instance, and the temperature gauge starts creeping up, that might be an indication that this car has not been used correctly or as in many different ways as it should have been. If a car's just been driven a couple of miles at slow speeds all its life, the engine potentially, and the radiator as well, could be silted up. That's a big issue. You might have to flush the whole engine out, you might have to replace the radiator. Might not necessarily be a walkaway issue, but it will be a negotiating point. All of these things are negotiating points. Equally, sit in a traffic jam. Sit in a traffic jam and see what happens to the temperature gauge. If it goes up, again, negotiate, negotiate, negotiate. Cars are meant to be used. You're going to have to live with this thing for the next 10, 15, 20 years, who knows? So the longer your test drive, the better. As well as the temperature gauge, if it's fitted with an oil pressure gauge, check that. Make sure that the oil pressure is good, or at least it's in the region that is recommended by the buyer's guide you might have looked at, or even the owner's manual. Oil pressure gauge, very good indicator, and all the instruments. Make sure all the instruments work, all the controls work. Check the heater controls. Make sure that the heater comes on, gives you lots of heat, even on a summer's day. It's really important. If it doesn't work, you've got to find out why. Make sure that the demist function works. If you turn it to demist and suddenly you start seeing misting on the windscreen, that might mean that the heater matrix has got a leak. Also, check for the smell in the car. If you could smell a spicy smell or something that's a little bit curryish, that could be glycol antifreeze leaking into the cockpit, and that's a problem. You've got to replace the heater matrix, probably a big expense. Again, a good negotiating point. Right, when you get back from your test run, leave the engine running. Check for overheating. Have a look at the temperature gauge. If the car's got electric fans, wait for them to kick in. Make sure they do. Leave it running as well and check for anything else like smoke from the rear exhaust, all sorts of stuff you'll be able to find out from letting the car sit and tick over, because remember, you're going to be doing that in a traffic jam one day. If everything so far in the 3 videos we've covered makes you happy and you're still interested in buying a car, then you've got to start thinking about how to do the deal. Okay, I'm going to assume that you've watched the other 3 videos. You've worked out what car you want. You've worked out whether that car is in decent condition by checking the bodywork and the engine. You've taken it for a test drive. And now, with all that in mind, you're ready to do a deal. Now, this is a very touchy point. You've got to make sure you don't pay over the odds for this car, of course, but equally, you mustn't go in and take the mickey. So I would say don't offer the asking price, but make sure that any price that you do offer reflects a number of things. Firstly, the market value of the car, the potential growth in value of that car. Also, what you might need to do to make that car the car that you want it to be. It's got to all be evidence-based though. You can't just go in and say you're going to pay anything just because you feel like it. So make sure that when you negotiate, everything you negotiate with is actually real and you can prove it. Be firm, but also be polite. There's no point in making this something which isn't pleasant, but go in with your bottom line figure in mind as well. Let's see how it works out. Remember that as soon as the paperwork's been completed, there's no tax on the car. So it's up to you to get it sorted. Make sure the car's got an MOT as well. and line up insurance before the visit so it only takes a quick call once you're there. Make sure your recovery membership is up to date if you're driving a long way, and if in doubt, trailer the car home or get it recovered. Enjoy the process, but also make sure that at the end of it you get a receipt. The receipt is essential, and if you're buying from a private seller and there is a problem afterwards, go to Citizens Advice. If you're buying from a trader, it's trading standards you need to consult. Quick note about payments. Cash used to be king, unless you had a cleared cheque. But these days there are lots of different ways to get your money across. You can, of course, still use cash, but there's PayPal, there are balance transfers. If it's a professional trader, you can use a debit or a credit card. Each of these payment methods have different legal ramifications, so it's worth doing a little bit of research before you buy the car. But make sure you get a receipt every single time.